So thank you everyone for being here. And this is, I don't know if you can tell, our first book talk of the academic year. Everyone Wins, the evidence for family school partnerships and implications for practice. My name is Mayan Crevochet, and I'm the Communications and Administration Coordinator here at Gutman Library. I would like to briefly introduce two of the authors who are here with us today. Dr. Karen Mapp is a senior lecturer on education here at HGSC, and Dr. Stephanie Cuevas is an assistant professor of education in the Atala College of Educational Studies at Chapman University. Welcome, and thank you for being here.
So Stephanie, can you hear us? Give me a thumbs up if you can, and we're going to put you
Yes, can you hear me?
Okay, perfect. Excellent, excellent. So welcome everyone. We're very happy to be here with you today. As my intro said, my name is Dr. Karen Mapp. I've been here at the Ed School now since 2005. And as a way of introduction, I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, and then Dr. Cuevas is also going to weigh in, tell you a little bit about herself, because we want you to know why we're in this work around family school partnerships, what sort of propelled us into this work. I don't know how many of you are thinking about taking my class in the spring. Maybe some of you are here to sort of check her out and see what she's like, right? Which I totally get. So let me tell you a little bit about why family engagement is so passionate about it, and sort of a little bit about who I am. So when I graduated from college, some of you may know Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut, okay? I graduated from college a long time ago in a galaxy very far, far away. And I did some work with students back then. I started to work with some of the youth in the Hartford area, and I really started to get very interested in why they decided to go on to college. Fast forward, I worked for the Bell system for a long time. None of you in this room, well, some of us in this room, I won't look and point out, but will remember that there used to only be one phone company in this country, okay? And that was called Ma Bell, AT&T. I worked for them for almost 10 years. But when I asked myself a question that I'll ask many of you when you come to my office hours, is why do I want the world, or how do I want the world to be different because I'm in it, right? And when I asked myself that question when I was at the phone company, I didn't have a good answer. It wasn't for me. Left the phone company, went back to work at Trinity in college admissions. So I had an opportunity to work with these students once again, but trying to pull students into college, and I was trying to figure out what were the ingredients that made students successful in high school. So I started to ask them, and they started telling me a lot about their families. And when I say family during this presentation, I mean any and all adult caretakers, because they were talking to me about their grandmas and their grandpas and their aunties and their uncles and their abuelas, right? All of those folks. And they said to me that that relationship with that adult in their family was really key. Now, interestingly, when I went and talked to the schools and said, you know, families are a big part of why your students are successful, guess what I got? Crickets. Or I got, Miss, you don't know what you're talking about. Those families don't care, is what I heard a lot. So I knew there was a disconnect. Had a mentor who said, sounds like a great dissertation topic. Came here and got supported by this wonderful woman here, Susan Moore Johnson, who was on my dissertation committee and has supported me for a long time, including coming back here to Harvard. But I've been very, very passionate about this for over 30 years. And so what you're going to hear today is a little bit about what we've learned about why engagement is so, so important. Okay, Dr. Cuevas, you want to tell us a little bit about you and why you do this work?
Yes, hi everyone. I'm very excited to be able to join via Zoom. I wish I could be there in person. I don't know. I saw some of the codes coming in, so I don't know if I'm ready to go back to that winter life. So I'm zooming in from sunny, it's actually very sunny Southern California. But very happy to be here and discuss some of the work that we've been doing with Dr. Map, I want to say almost 10 years now, Karen. A little bit about myself. I'm first generation college student. I'm also the proud daughter of Mexican immigrants, grew up in LA. And fast forwarding, very much like Dr. Matt mentioned, my work to family engagement as a research really came from practice. So when I went to undergraduate at UC Berkeley, and from there, I was a college advisor working at Skyline High School, specifically in Oakland Unified School District. And there, very similarly to what Dr. Mapp was saying, there was a mismatch between what I would hear from administrators about the particularly Spanish-speaking Latino and Latina parents, particularly mostly immigrant. So there will be a disconnect between I was hearing from admin and from what I was hearing from the parents. So parents, when they found out that I spoke Spanish, flocked to me and began to ask me, we want to help our children get to college, but we don't know how to. When the school has programming, it's often in English. And if they do it, they have translators, but they don't really translate. Sometimes some of the documents that we get, we can tell that they Google pasted it to Google Translate because the text doesn't make sense. So they felt very disrespected by the admin. So when I was with them, I began to ask them, well, what kind of questions do you have? What would you like to know? And of course, they're going to ask me about financial aid, how to pay for college, what classes their children needed. And slowly we started collecting a list of questions that they had. And then we started creating a curriculum. We started creating workshops. We will have bi-monthly workshops. And y'all, these parents had me at Oakland High Schools at 6 a.m. because that was the time that parents could make it, right? We had to arrange our schedules of our workshops around what worked best for them. A lot of these parents had multiple jobs. So it was through those workshops, creating them, translating things into Spanish, that I began to develop really good relationships with some parents. And Latina and other immigrant families and families of color, you know that families care for you through food. So families began to give me food. And again, really began to develop relationships. And it was within those relationships that families began to disclose to me that they were afraid that their children were not going to be able to go to college because they were undocumented. So me understanding policies, I was like, no, undocumented children can still go to college in California. It may be a little bit harder, but they could go to our public schools. And the parents were like, no, my child is a U.S. citizen, but I'm afraid that the government, the schools are going to punish them for my mistake because I'm undocumented, right? So they began to disclose. And then back then, this was around 2011, 2012, I really looked for resources that could help me support these families and these parents, and I couldn't find any. We were beginning as a researcher, as educators, to understand the plight of undocumented students, but we hadn't gotten to their parents yet. So very similarly to what Dr. Matt mentioned, I had identified a gap in the literature, and I had a mentor at UC Berkeley who told me, well, you like research, this is a research question, and sent me packing to the Harvard Graduate School of Education. When I got there, that's why when Dr. Mapp was mentioning her class, sorry, Karen, I really highly encourage it, because it was in that class that I realized that my practice, that I was engaging with families, that I was doing family engagement, that what I was doing was co-creating curriculum. What I was doing was developing relational trust, things that I didn't know the concept, but I knew it was the way to ethically approach families and work with them. So that is what took me to the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where I work with Dr. Mapp since I started in 2012, graduated in 2019, and I'm now a faculty member at Chapman University, where I continue to do work on family engagement, Latino and Latina immigrant families, and undocumented students. So that's a little bit about me, and I'm very happy to be here.
Now switch to where I think Stephanie might be on the side and I show the slides.
Oh, yes. I definitely know
Let's see.
Sorry.
Yeah, John, is he not around still? Yeah, I assumed you know how to do it, so.
Sorry, oh, wait. Oh, okay.
So you have to make it so that she's still on the screen and the PowerPoint is also showing. Without,
On the sharing screen?
yeah. I don't know, I think my PowerPoint's loaded.
I'm the host, so I can maybe try to do that from my computer.
Okay, give it a whirl.
Might be able to do that. I don't wanna mess it up.
So let me tell you a little bit about the book while we're waiting to do that. So, why we published this book? Thank
Hi.
you, John, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Share
We
screen.
published this book because most of the time, a lot of practitioners don't really understand the why of family engagement. And they need to know the why of family engagement. Why is it important? And so they need to understand what the research is in order to make the case. But I don't know about you all, I don't have time, unfortunately, to ask what you all were doing before you came to the ed school, whether you were in the classroom, or whether you were working for a not-for-profit, or maybe some of you were right out of undergrad. But when you need to convince your administrations, your districts, your ministries of education, the federal government, why they need to spend resources on family engagement, you gotta come with some data, all right? And a lot of you maybe don't have time to do the research yourself. So, thank you so much, thank you so much. So what we did was, we decided we were gonna do that work for you and create a very user-friendly resource that summarized the literature. And the book is called Everyone Wins. You can see now, these are the 5 of us that work together on the book.
Minimize that.
Okay, thank you. One of the things that Stephanie knows, and what you all will find out about me, is me and technology. I mean, I'm still trying, y'all. I'm trying. You think I would know by now, but I have all these wonderful student folks who have helped me out. So when these things happen, I say, help, help. So our 5 authors, myself, as you can see, things have changed in terms of the hairstyle. After COVID, we won't talk about why that is right now, but this is a whole heck of a lot easier. I'm just gonna put it like that. Ann Henderson has been one of my co-authors for quite some time. We've written a couple of books together. One of them is called Beyond the Bake Sale, and people consider it sort of the Bible of family engagement, so to speak. Obviously, Dr. Cuevas. Then we have here Susana Edwards. She was a master's student. And Martha, is it Hernandez? I'm forgetting Martha Martha Franco. So all of these folks, 1, 2, 3, were all Harvard students. One of the things that I like to do is I like to include you all in the research so you can get practice doing it, and also get a little citation to your name as a published author, okay? So, I didn't know, this is not, could you go to the next slide, please? This is not working. Yeah, see, I don't know if this is your computer.
I'm gonna just sit up here and advance it for you. You got it?
It's not going. It just did, but now it's not doing anything. Do you know where this is loaded?
You need the IT person to come back,
Yeah, you're gonna have to
sorry.
have John come back. All right, we're just gonna keep going. So this book is actually the 5th in the series of what we call the evidence books, okay? Ann Henderson started this series, oh goodness, about 30 years ago, because she knew that you needed the research, okay? So the Everyone Wins book is the 5th in the series. The other one was called A New Wave of Evidence. And a new wave of evidence, okay, thank you. A new wave of evidence was published about 20 years ago, and many of your colleagues who were starting to take my class said to me, Dr. Matt, this is a really nice book, but this research is too old. We don't want to just see studies that were done up to 2001. So I called Ann and I said, Ann, we're gonna have to do another book because we need to do a summary of the research from 2001 until now, okay? So what ended up happening when we did that? We looked at over 40 studies, and these are some big headlines. And Susan, you are absolutely responsible for my frame of mind about headlines. I don't know if you remember, back when I did my doctoral research, and we were trying to come up with what was I gonna say about what I found, you said, think of it as headlines. You know, what would you say if there was a newspaper headline from your research? What would those headlines be? And I retain that way of framing my work. What are the big headlines? What would make the New York Times or whatever, Ed Week, out of the research you were doing? So these are the two headlines, the big headlines, extra, extra, that came out of summarizing the studies for Everyone Wins. First off, we know now that these partnerships don't only just benefit students. So the books that we have done in the past basically said, what is the relationship between this engagement and student outcomes? But when we looked at these studies for this book, we started to see, wait a minute, there's a return on investment, not just for students, but for educators, for families, for schools, and also districts and communities. The second thing that was a big headline was, guess what? We now know from this research, what are the conditions for effective practice? So what we're able to do is we're able to say, for all of you, we know what effective practice now looks like, and we can share it with you so that when you go out and you work with families, we've got some tools and some mindsets that you're gonna have to adopt in order to be successful, okay? Research-based tools, mindsets, dispositions. Okay, so let's talk about the wins for students. Now, I'm gonna offer, and the folks in here have heard me speak before, I'm looking at the crowd. Many of you may not know this particular commercial. It's an old one, but I've seen it pop up again. How many of you have ever seen this commercial by Wendy's where this older woman yells out, "Where's the beef?" Oh, wow, I'm surprised. Okay, so what that commercial represents is a person saying, if I'm gonna spend my hard-earned resources on your product, what's the return on investment? Okay, so what we're gonna talk about now quickly, we're not gonna read all of these, but we're gonna talk about what's the return on investment for each one of the groups that we were able to identify by doing this research summary. The other thing you should know is that in the book, we actually summarize the studies for you. So there's one-page summaries, they can be ripped out, you can share them, people use them for professional development. We've done that work for you. So we were the ChatGPT, right? We summarized the studies for you, and we didn't use ChatGPT to do it either, okay? So what do we know about the return on investment for our students? So take a look at what's up there. Like I said, we're not gonna list out all of these because we'll read off all of these because we wanna make time, we have time for questions. But these are the things that we want for our students. Now, one of the things, the second one that's there, better attendance and engagement in class. I am a part of a study that we're doing right now that there's a big article that's coming out in Ed Week, I think it just came out last week, about how we now know that schools that had strong relationships of trust with their families before the pandemic not only did better during the pandemic in terms of their transitions, if they had to go from remote to coming back to school, but right now, those schools show less students being chronically absent than other schools because of the family engagement. We ran the data, we've got data from Chicago, and have been able to isolate the family engagement and the partnership as the reason those students are coming to school. That's a big deal. I'm sure you all have seen all the reports lately about chronic absenteeism, okay? All right, what do we see for educators? This is a big thing. You know, a lot of times we're trying to figure out, how do we shift deficit-based mindsets about families to be more asset-based? And we are finding that when schools and districts and organizations bring people together in fellowship, having them work together, having the child be at the center, and say, we're gonna join hands and we're gonna support that child, that act of being together in fellowship, talking together about what can I do to help your child, but what do you know? What is your knowledge? I know you're your child's first teacher. And as that, I am gonna honor that, and I wanna partner with you. Now, what we know is that the institutions have to take the first step, right? Because we have a lot of families, Stephanie will tell you, a lot of families who are intimidated by us, intimidated by school. So what we do is we're working on, how do we build those relationships of trust? And when that happens, we find that our deficit-based mindsets about one another shift when we work in fellowship and partnership. That was a big deal coming out of one of the studies by Catherine McKnight that's in the book. So when parents and families and teachers and others work together to build relationships, the deficit-based mindsets they had about each other evaporated. So I say family engagement and partnership is the vaccine, almost, for deficit-based thinking. Okay? We also see that schools and other organizations that have a strong family engagement culture, their staff don't want to leave. They stay at those places. They feel like, it feels like family to them. They feel connected. When they go there, they feel like they have people who understand them and know them. So what we see is that teachers particularly do not want to leave schools where there's strong family engagement. I interviewed one high school teacher who said, my families are the wind beneath my wings. And why would I want to be at a place where that was not cultivated? All right? So Stephanie, you're going to take over from here, Wins for Families.
Yes. So one of the most exciting things coming out of this round of research, again, we began around 2002 to the present, was that research was now moving to actually talking to families. And what I mean by that is that we had established that family engagement was essential for student success. But now what we began to see is that the focus of the research and the participants and the focus of studies were now the families themselves, which was really exciting, at least from my end, because we used to talk about family engagement without actually talking to the families. So what a lot of this research really showed is that just as teachers win from family engagement, so do the families, right? Like Dr. Mapp mentioned earlier, and what the research is also showing is that families is very broadly defined, right? So it's not only our parents doing the upbringing, but the older siblings, the aunties, the uncles. And what the research is really showing is that when families and schools are working closer together, you actually are seeing stronger relationship between parent and child. So now schools are doing that work of helping families. How do you help your child at home when you feel you can't help them, right? Some of the research shows us that around grade 6, 7, when we start introducing letters to math, is when families feel that they can no longer help their children with homework. But what educators have been doing is that they're helping parents and families how to ask different questions at home, and that strengthens parent-child relationships. And with that, you also see parents who are more comfortable in advocating for their children's education. So you see families, parents really advocating and being knowledgeable about the school system and demanding that their children's rights and their children's needs are being met. And because of this, you're also seeing parent empowerment. We're finding that parent leadership is now moving to become more diverse, and we'll talk about that, the implications. But we're seeing that traditionally families that felt marginalized, excluded, unwelcome by schools, when there is strong family engagement practices, they feel more empowered to take on leadership positions. So our PTAs stop going from being about white middle-class families to being more diverse and more inclusive to families of color, low-income families, immigrant families, and you begin to see that language barriers begin to disseminate a little bit with family engagement practices. So this is where we begin. Again, one of the big headlines for Win for Families is really that family empowerment piece. Karen, if you could go to the next slide. And because of this, because as Dr. Matt was mentioning, you go from not only our students, educators, and families winning, so this is also entails a win for schools. You begin to see a more positive school climate. Again, you begin to see schools shifting to be more welcoming, right? They have a better reputation. And when they have a better reputation, like Dr. Matt was mentioning, you have a higher morale and greater retention of teachers. Right? Families want to stay, the educators want to stay, and that just improves the school culture, but also it makes the schools more responsive to community concerns. When you have families and educators working together, and also you include children in that equation, there are more schools become more knowledgeable of what the community actually wants, and they have better access to respond to those needs and desires, right? So again, in the school slowly begin to build a reputation that they are supportive, that they're welcoming, and then it also ultimately leads to wins for district level. So Dr. Mapp, if you go on to the next slide. And again, these all add up, right? So as our schools are doing better, so are school districts and our communities, right? So some of the research that we found really looked at the relationship between family engagement and community organizing. A lot of our community organizing often starts at the schools. It starts with families working to advocate for their children, and then they go from their singular child to the classroom, to the school, and eventually it trickles out to more advocating and organizing for community-wide initiatives. So we really saw an increase, like it says on the slides, of family and youth involvement in site-based decisions. So again, how do we get more voices in the tables? But overall, what you also saw is an expanded mental and physical health resources, right, for the community. So again, COVID it was a really interesting time to be writing this book, because post-COVID, you began to see how schools not only became sites of learning, but also of community resources, particularly as families began to demand and ask for mental and physical health resources. So again, that improves the relationship that communities and districts have with local communities. And because of this, you also begin to see high levels of participation in out-of-school programming. So again, it's about partnership, right? So you not only are families partnering with educators, family partnering with educators, but also community organizations are now partnering with schools and partnering with families to make almost like the perfect trifecta of the different stakeholders that are going to benefit our students and their outcomes. And again, you begin to see, as we mentioned in the beginning, as more folks are talking to each other and partnering with each other, you are seeing an increased high school graduation rate, right? The research documents that the more family and community engagement that there is. So it's not only about schools working with families, but also communities working with schools and families. You begin to see high school graduation rates increase, and also the likelihood of students applying to and being accepted into institutions of higher education also increase. So as you see, all these different elements are part of a bigger puzzle piece that's built from each other.
Thanks, Stephanie. Thank you. So we didn't stop there. We didn't just summarize the research. We then went forward, because again, this is a book that we're hoping is for practitioners and others who are actually doing the work, policymakers and others. We then took a look at, so what does this mean in terms of action steps. What would we like the field to do? And so one of the things that was a through line through every single study that we read was the role of respect and trust. And we have to double click on that, because a lot of times when I do work with districts around the world, actually, they skip over this step of building trust with their families and their communities. They somehow think that it just happens through osmosis. It does not. You have to be intentional about doing this work. So what does that mean? If you come into a community, and I'm thinking about many of you, how many of you in here are actual master's students? Raise your hands. Okay, so in a little while, this program goes by fast, folks. You're going to be back out into your communities. You're going to be making decisions about where you're going to work. And one of the things that I'm going to push you to think about is, how will I develop trust in the communities that I place myself in? Particularly if you're going somewhere that you're not familiar with, you're working with a new population, maybe you're working with families from different cultures. You've got to figure out how you're going to build trust with families. One way of doing that is putting the child at the center, okay? But you've got to figure out, how do I work in solidarity with my families towards justice, okay? So we'll talk a lot about this in my course. How do you build trust? And I just want you today, as you walk around, think about, how do I know when I'm trusted by somebody else? What do I do to cultivate trust with that person? And unfortunately, a lot of times, and I don't know, I've got some ideas, which we won't share here because it'd take too long, about why we don't do that in the education system, but it is absolutely essential. The work that we do is love work, people. Love work, okay? And somehow or another, sometimes we don't talk about that, but it's very central to what we do. And love is essential to trust, okay? So that's the first thing you need to think about. Also, you want to start these engagement practices when the children are young. And I know we have, we think about all the different initiatives that have come out of the ed school, the 0 to 5 work, the early ed work. But a lot of times we forget that our families are indeed their children's first teachers. And this is an organization here in Boston called First Teacher. And what they do is they try to cultivate and grow parent knowledge. One of my colleagues, Debbie Pusher, writes about parent knowledge. Our families have a lot of funds of knowledge that we have to honor. And so you want to start early, because the research shows that if you start families early in cultivating these partnerships with educators and vice versa, that kind of relationship lasts for a lifetime. Okay? You want to make sure that you communicate clearly. Some of you may know about Professor Todd Rogers over at the Kennedy School. Todd and I are best buddies, and we talk a lot about how do we make our messages clear. Now, I'm not going to get on to ed school, but I think I am, and it's kind of funny. The emails, right? The emails. And I'm always, now that my brain is sort of programmed to try to make messages clear, I always think about, how can we make these messages, as my friend U.T. Saunders used to say, clear, crisp, and concise. All right? So we want to make sure that we communicate with our families in a way where we're also thinking about their cultures, their languages, and doing it in a way that's respectful and honoring our families' backgrounds. Okay, Stephanie, I think you're going to take the next couple of ones.
Yes. So building from what they all build from each other. So building from what Dr. Mapp said, right? From establishing trust and starting family engagement practices early, and this idea of constant ongoing communication, we also found that we need to focus on equity, right? We need to move beyond equality and actually focus on equity. And getting to know our families also means getting to learn about their lived realities. So we need to also make sure that we provide extra support for the families, for all our families, in order to get their children, to support their children's learning and their social emotional well-being. Particularly, sometimes, we have to take into consideration in our programming childcare, invitations, making sure that we're inviting families to the table. And I'll just add a little bit about my own research here. We need to consider families' immigration status. So I was mentioning earlier my work, which is published in the book as well. It's included in there. But my work really found that families' undocumented immigration status often served as a barrier that schools were not aware. Often because immigration status is something that families really keep to themselves. It's a well-hidden secret. Schools do not know whose families are undocumented. And that's completely fine. But what I found is that schools often had systems in place for security that unintentionally block undocumented parents. And what I mean by that is, for example, some schools and a lot of schools throughout the nation have a rule or a policy that says that if families want to volunteer, be present in the schools more than 7 minutes, they need to show some sort of valid form of ID. Well, if you're undocumented, you often don't have a formal valid U.S. government sanctioned ID. And that served as a barrier for families that they didn't feel comfortable attending schools. So schools didn't know about this, right? Schools had these policies in place for safety measures. But once they realized that they were setting up unintentional barriers for their undocumented parents, we worked with them together to find ways to mediate that. Right. So again, that is just one example of the importance of developing trust and relations with families, and how that also serves into focusing on equity. Next slide, Dr. Mapp. And then another thing, this is why everyone should be taking Dr. Mapp's class. Dr. Mapp, I'm sorry, I'm going to keep impacting your class in numbers, but we really need to educate and prepare all our educators are across all roles. So not only our teachers and our admin, but our counselors, our college counselors, our cafeteria staff, to really work with families, right? Something that if and when you take Dr. Mapp's class, you'll learn is that we are not giving educators or families the capacity or the opportunity to learn how to work together, right? So this is one of the main takeaways that I'm often when I work with school districts, when I work with my own students, that we really need to provide pre-service and ongoing professional development, right? One thing that I wish that if I had a magic wand, taking all the implications of our studies, is that I would require that every credentialing program, both at the teaching, at school leadership, and counseling level, took a family engagement course. So they learn the research and the best practices, because again, we've learned across all different educators that educators don't feel prepared to work with families of all backgrounds, right? So that is just one way that I'm here sitting advocating that you all take Dr. Mapp's class if you're able to. Next slide. And then, like I was mentioning before, another big takeaway is that we need to work with our community organizations, right? So extend networks, partnerships, and opportunities for parents and family leadership, right? So it's about educators knowing who's around them. What are the community organizations that are near the area? What are the community organizations that are willing to partner and work with them in order not only to provide services, but to also help empower our students and our families. So it's really about collaboration and working in partnership with community organizations to really leverage power across all stakeholders and really make it so that the community benefits. So that's another through line that we saw, that when schools are working closely in partnership with community organizations, again, the whole community benefits, not just the schools and not just the families. So these are some of the major takeaways that we have from the book.
Thanks, Stephanie. So that concludes our portion of this, but we wanted to open up the floor for some questions. We have about 10 minutes. I know some of you probably are going to be rushing off to class, But any questions do you have about the presentation? Yes, and say your name, please. And I think they want you to use the mic because we have people that are on.
Hi. Okay.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Theo. I'm a student at the master's program, the EPA program. Thank you, Dr. Mab and Dr. Cuevas, for this opportunity. And I'm really interested in like, how do you get schools and teachers to change that mindset of like understanding how important it is to like collaborate with parents. I've worked at a school and I've heard a lot of times like when you have this parent that is always at school and asking about their kid, they say like verbally like, oh, here comes a complicated parent. Like they don't want them at the school. And I'm like, we need more parents like that. So in your practice, how have you seen that mindset changed? And also like, I know teachers already have a lot in their plate, and asking them to like take this into their plate again, it's like, how do you work with the school administrators also to give them space?
Great question. So here's what I think. We've seen a couple of things work, but I'm going to point out this one thing because I think it's really what it makes a huge difference. A lot of times when I work with districts, they will say to me, we have goals for our district, and they'll have a goal sheet, a strategic plan, right? And they'll put, higher grades and test scores. They'll put lower chronic absenteeism. They'll put things about perhaps reading, ELA scores. They have all this stuff, and then on the goals list, they'll put family and community engagement, right? Well, what happens? I'll go and they'll say, well, Dr. Park, these other things are really important, and we'll get to that later. What I tell them to do is, I say, you have the family and community engagement in the wrong spot. It should not be on the goal side. It should be on the strategy side. So now, if I say to you, I'm going to help reduce chronic absenteeism at your school. I'm going to help you raise your ELA scores. I'm going to help you make it so that we have more students that are college and career ready. You're going to say, great, how do I do that? I say, let's try an engagement strategy. You're going to be a whole lot more willing to do that because that is now in parallel and supporting what you're trying to do in your classroom. And then it doesn't feel like an extra thing, it feels like a strategy, right? So that's one of the things we're starting to see in our districts, to say, don't have a separate family engagement office that's doing family engagement stuff unless it's connected to what your goals are, right? So now the administration, now the teachers are more willing to sign on because it doesn't feel like, oh, here's one more thing you're asking me to do that doesn't feel like it has anything to do with what I think I'm supposed to be doing around children's learning and development. We're seeing that work to shift mindsets. Now what you got to do is you got to provide them with the resources. You can't just say to your teachers, and say, go forth and do family engagement, good luck, right? You can't do that. You have to make sure you provide the infrastructure, the supports. So we do a lot of work with the school leaders, the principals, but we give them best practices that we know work so that they're not trying and doing the same old kind of lame stuff they've been doing. So when we bring the practices and we show them how it works to improve their outcomes, we have more and more people who are saying, okay, I'm in. Now, I will tell you, COVID was a forcing function around family engagement because practitioners realized we can't do anything without our families. My phone rang off the hook because they said, okay, now we're ready for you to teach us how to, oh yeah, now you're ready. Okay, you didn't want to do it before, now you want it. But we're finding more willingness, but it does take time, and sometimes you have to start slowly, okay? Yes, go ahead.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Esteban, and I'm a student in the school leadership pathway. And one of the things I've been thinking about listening to this talk is wondering how even at a school level, do you build internal capacity and mobilize school-based resources and structure to ensure that there's like intentional time set aside for family engagement?
Stephanie, you want to take this one? Or you want me to take it?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, feel free to add, Dr. Mapp. I think something that at the it's essentially what Dr. Mack just said, right? So it's about how do you make family engagement a strategy, but also a priority, right? So I think that a lot of the research really shows is that family engagement, it really, when the school leader is bought into family engagement, it trickles down, and they're the kind of the ones that set up the space, the pace, right? So I think something that also school leaders, there's a study in the book, and I'm forgetting the author, but what the school leader does is like, it's not only the job of the teachers and the counselors to get to know the families, but it's most important that the school leader gets to know the families. And this is not only at the school level, but also at the district level. So when you have superintendents that have relationship with individual families, when you have school principals that know their students and their families, it is most effective. And that just takes strategizing and, again, making it a priority to have those principal and coffee dates, right? Or have like open office hours or meetings with families, and just be very intentional about getting to know the family. So that's something that I'll add for that. And again, the role of the principal and the school leader is really to develop the capacity of your staff, right? So how can school leaders use professional development opportunities, staff meetings, to always remind them about the importance of partnering with families? So that's where I'll get started with that question. I don't know if you have anything else to add, Dr. Mapp.
Well, in my opinion, and it's not just my opinion, it's actually the research, the school leader is key. Absolutely key. They set the tone, right, for what happens. You have Professor Grasso O'Neill here, who's led this for a long time, and she knows this. And I love the way that she talks to her students about this. You set the tone because you set the culture. You begin to mold and shape the culture in your building. And so guess what? You have to lead by example. You can't just say family engagement is important. I was deputy superintendent for family engagement for the Boston Public Schools for 2 years. And I went and visited schools. And my principals all told me, oh, Dr. Mapp, we love family engagement. And then I would watch them. And I watched the way they interacted with their families. And I said, come here. No, your body language doesn't show that you want to interact with families, right? So you're going to really set the tone for how family engagement is in your place by how you embody, by how you shape it, by how you show that it's in your core. It's a part of your core beliefs about the school. And if you make it part of your core beliefs, it'll become part of the DNA of the school. Okay? All right? Yes.
My name is Missy, and I'm curious, your thoughts as we roll out UPK and we have this time to engage families from the very start of education, trends or things that you think or hope as this program becomes available for everyone and their kids.
Which program?
UPK, Universal Pre-K.
Oh, yeah, boy. We'll keep our fingers crossed, right? Because it's so important. But again, it needs to be in the, in the rollout. This needs to be a part of, like I said, the DNA. Because if they start early, and I have to say, the pre-K folks do a little bit of a better job with this already. Okay, they do. Because I think they realize, they've got to speak with families, but it's how they speak with families that makes a difference, right? You could do universal pre-K one way where families are still seen as, well, I had one person came to my class a few years ago who basically told me that the job of the school was to inoculate the students from their families. So if you have that attitude, that's going to have a real impact on how you work with families, right? So what I say is that this is where leadership is really important. This is where mindset is important. If you have the attitude that families are your partners, and we can't do this without them, that's going to be very different than somebody says, well, just give me your child and we'll do the rest. Because what we really want to do is to make them feel like your community is less than and other communities are better. Okay? So it's part of the mindset of how things get rolled out.
I have a question here on Zoom from India. Sorry. Someone is asking if you have any tips or insight on what to do if the child is the first in their family to get an education, if they're a first-generation learner of any kind.
That is the perfect time to make sure that you talk to families, right? Because, first of all, your families are probably intimidated a little bit because this is their first experience with school. And the thing of it is that you have to adopt, as the educators, the mindset, again, that your families have funds of knowledge that you need in order for you to be the best practitioner you can possibly be. In my class, we do something called a phone call home exercise, where I ask people to think about, if you feel like the family is the expert on their child, how would you make that phone call? And one of the things one of my students started with was, I am your child's teacher, but you are your child's first teacher. And in order for me to be the best educator I can possibly be, I have to start with learning information from you about your child. So that's the perfect time to reach out to families and say, hey, I know this is your first experience. Let's talk about this. What do you know about your child that makes it so that we can create the best experience, not just for your child, but for you as well? Okay, one more question. Yes.
Hi, this is Qing Qing, and I come from the Human Development and Education Department. I'm really inspired from your work, and I'm trying to implement in China. That with more research I have doing, that I realize actually in China since 2008 we actually have the same kind of policy to empower the partnership, but we are not seeing in the school or the families. And I come from a working class background, so within China's context we may not have this kind of really diverse kind of family, but the situation, the reality we are facing is we only have one lead teacher in the classroom are facing 46 or more students since elementary school. And I would love some advice, how can we not really put more work on the educators or the teachers, and then we can also let the parents' voice to be heard, because the reality is that the power dynamic is really shifting to the higher institution. Thank you.
I've had several students from China take the class, and what they do is they really think about the tools where families and the educators can work together in partnership on various goals for the child. So, for example, some of the things that we talk about in the class, community organizing, things like that, didn't quite apply to, the culture and the climate in China. But the idea of drawing the families in to work in partnership, which actually makes the job of the educator easier, right? Those were some of the things that we really talked about and they took back. So how can we be better about sharing what are the educational goals or developmental goals with families, and then finding a way to maybe have families in their own communities and at home do activities that pair with what's going on in the classroom. And then there's a better relationship of communication between home and school. So it's not, again, here's the child, you guys do everything, I get the child back at a certain time of night, and then it's how can we marry what you're doing in your community and at home with what I'm doing in the classroom. Okay? I know we're out of time. I know some of you have class that's going to start in a few minutes. Stephanie, did you want to say one more word before we sign off?
Yeah, I just want to thank everyone that's there attending. And again, this is just a brief introduction to family engagement. Highly encourage you all to grab the book. And I know there's some questions on the chat that I'm getting into, but overall, if you have questions about a specific student population or a specific context, like we also haven't discussed the difference between rural and urban and metropolitan engagement. Like it may look very differently. Highly encourage you to get the book and look at the main takeaways and the big picture headlines, because they are, while they may be specific to particular populations, the takeaways in the way that we frame them are still universal enough that they can support you in working with whatever population you are working with. So With that, I'm gonna again promote the book and share it with your fellow educators, and highly encourage you all to take Dr. Mapp's course. I'm sorry, Karen, but yes.
Please. Stephanie and you know, one of the things that I'm really excited about is that because of the time I've had here at the Ed School, we have quite a few of our graduates who are doing this work now, so that the baton has been passed on to them. So thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciate you. And I know there are copies of the book for sale. They may be a little cheaper now than they would be if you're going to take the class. I'm not sure, but thanks so much for being here. We really appreciate you. Thank you for your questions. They were great.